We would use the cash from company A to start company B, and cash from company A to buy company C. And then we take the cash from company A, B, and C to buy company D. And so we continued to build out over the, now past 40 years, Zig Ziglar. So Zig was motivational speaker, focused a lot on sales, and he was a follower of Jesus. And I remember listening to him one time, and he said, if you will help others get what they want, you will get great things in return. So basically the golden rule: if you do good to others, God will do good for you, will take care of you, things will happen for your benefit.
To help frame this story up for our fellow learners with Micah and I, take us back to, a little bit of your early years that shaped you, and then you've always been about enterprise. So talk to us about your companies that you've built, and then eventually we'll get into, well, how did you start to weave your life together into an integrated example? It might have been one of the early examples I saw 20 years ago when we bumped into each other at the Navigators with Terry Taylor, of really integrating your commercial and investment life with your Kingdom Impact life.
Yeah. So Lloyd, I grew up in a family that was not at all religious in any way, not interested in anything focused on Jesus. But throughout the process of God drawing me to himself, I went through various challenges as a teenager that were really, caused me some anxiety, most of which was typical of teenagers. And a friend of mine would invite me to Fellowship Christian Athletes every week during high school. And every week I would say no. And all freshman year, all sophomore year. And finally, beginning of junior year, I think, oh my gosh, he is never going to stop asking me to come to this Friday morning at 7 a.m. Fellowship Christian Athletes. And so I went once, and the person who was speaking, one of the coaches at the high school, was speaking on the story in the Bible where, and I had no idea where it was or anything at the time, but it was how these things about Jesus were predicted 700 years before they happened. So he was referring to Isaiah, and I just thought, that's incredible how something could be said and written down 700 years earlier, and it comes true in Jesus. And so I kept going back, and I really wanted to know and understand who Jesus was. And it was, probably a few months later that someone handed out a little gospel tract at FCA, and I read through it and realized that I was indeed a sinner. I didn't question that based on some of the things I'd been doing as a 16-year-old. But I had, through Jesus, I could have forgiveness because God had given us Jesus and as a gift, and he sacrificed himself for us. And so I prayed and asked Jesus to come into my life and started to make changes and progress. And so that's when I was 16 and continued to walk with Jesus. I think it's interesting. I found a lot of people that and I've studied this over the years, not just when I was a kid, but didn't really transition well from high school, their faith in high school, to their faith in college, and didn't really transition well their faith from college into their next phase of life. And I was very fortunate that God just wired me up that I was able to continue that transition. And so, I went on to study accounting in college, and from there went to law school and MBA school. And that was setting me up. I didn't know what it was setting me up for, but it was setting me up for most of what I've been doing ever since 1984. And the fortunate thing was, when I was in graduate school, I got around some people in the Navigators that started walking with me through life, and how to memorize scripture and how to have devotional time of quiet time in the scriptures and prayer every morning, and how to share my faith and help people get to know Jesus. And then it came down at the end of 4 years of grad school. I was planning on heading back to Chicago to help my dad with his businesses, because he had built up a number of businesses, and they were spread around the country. And he was in Hawaii a lot because he had amassed a lot of companies over there. And I was going to go back to Chicago with my wife, and at that time, one child. And I was going to dig in and start helping him with his businesses. Well, in my last year of graduate school, the person that was discipling me with the Navigators in Bloomington at Indiana University, he said, "Hey, I think you should consider sticking around for a couple more years of getting training with us." And I thought, that is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. When I go to undergrad in accounting and 4 years of graduate school, come out with my MBA, come out with my JD, and stay in Bloomington. And what am I going to do there? And so in our weekly discipleship meeting, the entire fall semester of my last year of grad school, we would argue. Just back and forth. He'd say, "I really think you should stay. You need to pray about this." I was like, I'm praying about it, but I'm not sensing God's telling me to stay. That just seems stupid. But over a period of time into the fall, later in the fall, I sensed that, God was telling me I needed to put down a stake, be willing to walk away from everything else and just go and do what God was calling me to do, and to stay in Bloomington and get more training with just how to disciple people and help them walk with Jesus, and help myself continue to walk with Jesus. At Christmas time, I told my dad that I was not going to move to Chicago, and I was going to stay in Bloomington. And he did a great job of hiding his, I guess, probably grand surprise and probably some disappointment. And I told him, if there's anything you need me to do, I'm happy to do it. If not, I'll just start my own company. And he called me back a couple weeks later and said, actually, I have this company, and he didn't tell me much about it, but he said it needs a leader. And so would you consider that? And I said, sure, that's fine. Well, what I found out is that he had hired some guys to start a new company, and they had been running that company for about 14 months, but they committed a bunch of fraud with the bank. So I didn't know any of this. My dad didn't tell me that was the case, but he had to terminate them, obviously, and he had an accountant that was just sort of keeping the wheels on that company. And so 6 months later, I started running that corporate travel management company. And, that was perfect for me at the time, because it pulled in, it was such a mess that it called me to pull in all my law, all my business understanding, and really pull a team together that could allow us to work our way through the situation. And so, and from that one company, we were able to get it turned around. God provided, there's all sorts of God stories in the midst of that, but he provided an amazing global account that was very large, and we kept growing it. And we made some acquisitions that allowed us to continue to grow that company. And then it was interesting because at one point, and this was one of the more significant parts of my business journey, was I had always been afraid or just not willing to spend money to hire a second in command, someone that could really take over a big load for me and handle things. And so I was thinking about it, and because what I would do is I would say to myself, all right, I'm going to have to take out of my wallet and hand someone, back in 1990, $120,000. That was a lot of money back then, still is. And they're not going to be as good as me anyway. Why would I do that? And eventually I came to the conclusion that if I do that, that frees me up to do other things. So even if they're only 80% as good, I can go ahead and make that decision and have the freedom to then go off and do other things. And so I made that decision. Fortunately, the person wasn't 80%. He was 100% as good as I was. And that allowed me to then go out and start looking for acquisitions. And we started buying other companies. We would use the cash from company A to start company B, and the cash from company A to buy company C. And then we'd take the cash from company A, B, and C to buy company D. And so we continued to build out over the now past 40 years. As I was on that path, one of the things that I determined, so is listening, you may remember, I'm sure you do, I'm not sure how many of our listeners will remember Zig Ziglar. So Zig was motivational speaker, focused a lot on sales, and he was a follower of Jesus. And I remember listening to him one time, and he said, if you will help others get what they want, you will get great things in return. So basically the golden rule: if you do good to others, God will do good for you, will take care of you, things will happen for your benefit. And so I determined that over the years, I was building my net worth, but what I wanted to do was have business partners that were operating partners and help them build their net worth. I didn't want to just go buy companies, hire someone to work there, and I keep all that. And so I wanted to have partners that we were like together in this, and they were really accelerating their own wealth in the midst of that. And the other thing that did for me was we now had partners that I could start influencing for the gospel of Jesus. And I've got numerous stories of my business partners coming to faith. I can remember one in particular. We were in LAX, Los Angeles Airport. It was gate 71, and we're getting ready to get on a red eye from LA to Chicago. And we just spent the whole day together. His name's Todd. And Todd says to me, he says, DG, I finally have it figured out. I was like, what's that? He said, well, I've been watching you for the last 10 years, and I finally understand that it's all about grace. And I want to trust Jesus and accept his grace. And, so that sort of thing, and other stories similar to that, of being in partnership with these people and walking in life with them and in business with them, has been really quite amazing, and has allowed me to be in their lives in unique ways. I think that's one of the things about business, more than just like being friends with someone that's a neighbor, or being out on the golf course with people. The opportunity to work with people in the midst of what is sometimes a very challenging situation, but they're watching us all the time. And so that's been really significant for me in terms of how I've been able to just minister into people's lives as we walk through business situations together.
And DG, as you think back to when you first saw this convergence of your ability as an entrepreneur to buy and grow companies and find partners, cast a vision, engage them in it, get behind, let your fruit grow on their trees. How did you first have the courage to open up the faith conversation? How did you do it in a way that was winsome? And how do new partners that come alongside not feel like, there's some, kind of second shoe that's going to drop, that you have an underlying agenda for them that they may or may not know about or agree with, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not hidden. So if you're signing up with me, it's sort of like, that's just who he is. So, people know that about me. I would say though that, my approach is just to live life with people and live it in a way that I'm, if there's a situation comes up, that I'm praying for them. I am not, so most of these people, we don't have partners that I haven't known for years. We don't just go interview people. It's like, oh, you want a job? And then we make them partners. So these are people that I've known for years. But what I don't do is just, pull out a gospel tract and say, hey, would you like to pray with me? It's really about winning them over by knowing how much I love them and care for them, and being in the midst of the trenches with them in business. And I think that's where they sense this person's for me. The idea that we are the person of Jesus in their life. I just need to, if I'm following the Holy Spirit and I'm walking with Jesus, they should be experiencing Jesus without me needing to say a whole lot until the opportunity comes along. And part of it is just me responding to what the Holy Spirit leads me to say and do. I can remember one of my business partners, we had, for a couple of years, the business had been struggling. And I knew that business was going to continue to struggle until he came to faith. There were all sorts of things that God needed to work out in his life. And it was just really clear to me that he needed to come to faith. And until he did, our business was not going to turn around. And so I tried to meet with each of my business partners for a half a day a month. And so I had just finished meeting with him. I got in the car and start driving away. And God says, you need to call Frank and you need to give him Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And so I called Frank up and I said, Frank, I was just driving along and God said, I need to call you and give you this verse. Trust the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. And so He's like, oh, thanks. Haven't thought about that in a while. And I appreciate that. And so that was it. It's just, but to be bold enough to say, hey, God told me to say this to you and give him the scripture. Interesting thing is that weekend, he was going to a men's retreat at his parish, and he's a Catholic man. And he shows up at the men's retreat, and they're handing out T-shirts, and on the shoulder of the T-shirt, it says Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Yes, I get emotional about it even now, a number of years later. It is just profound the way God does things like that. And so, as long as I'm listening to the Spirit, it's not overly complicated. I don't have to force anything on people.
Right. And you know what I love about that? If you just listen and sort of rewind the tape here, DG, for the last 3 minutes in that story, what we hear is exactly the four things Jesus talked about when you read across in the three Gospels where the story of the soils is mentioned. Cultivate a noble and good heart. In other words, you love him regardless, and you serve him, and you want his best, and you're going to help him grow wealth, and you're going to help him build a great family, and you're going to help him, love his wife extravagantly, right? And stay healthy. And then hear what God's saying. That takes time. And, like Moses had to turn aside to the burning bush in order to see something. He had to slow the pace, get the RPMs down to be able to. And it begs the question, how do you and I systematically stop and listen, but then accept it, which means turn what you heard into action? So pick up the phone, have the courage to say, hey, this is going to sound weird, but here's what I think, a word of encouragement I have for you. And then, of course, the fourth step that we learn from Jesus' stories is perseverance. So you have worked at this, like I said, when you and I first met each other 25 years ago with Terry Taylor at the Navigators home office, I think, we both had dark hair, right? And now I'm 62, and we've been at this idea of using our business success as a platform for kingdom impact for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And there are some gut punches along the way. There's some setbacks. Challenges happen in our family, in our health, in our friendships, in our, even financial things come along. So talk a little bit about, over these years, how you've done so many companies. How have you found the courage to keep showing up, keep following this process you just described?
I think it's been really a focus of, I tend to be hyper intentional. And so, I tend to make plans, big vision. And then I have people that I know are watching me, and it's a sort of an accountability, but it's also not a formal accountability. But I know in my mind, there are people watching me. There are people that are like, how he's going to handle this situation. It's like my friend Todd said, I've been watching you for 10 years. So I think part of it is just realizing that there are people watching me, and I need to be ready to do what I've said I'm going to do, and to keep pursuing Jesus and keep working and doing our best in what we do. And now at 65, I'm starting to, almost 66, starting to think about, what does it look like to transition to the next generation, and how do we go about doing that? And so, being very intentional about that, and thinking about how are we setting up, what's the foundation that's been laid, and how do I continue to do that?
You've made pretty significant contribution as well in several different ways. One, in your philanthropy, but also in roles like the chairman of the Navigators, which I mean, has 3 or 4,000 people around the world, making a big difference in places that are often hard to reach. What have you learned, in a few minutes, share what you've been learning about how you take these marketplace skills, the MBA, the law degree, et cetera, and bring them over into a space that operates very differently and do it in a warm-hearted, winsome way that doesn't come across, as if, the nonprofit world is operating at a very slow pace.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about that because the the navigators, some other organizations that I'm on the board of, they desire to have marketplace people involved, and not just from the money, although that's important and that's fine. That's part of what philanthropy is all about, and generosity is all about. But bringing the years of experience of leading presidents, CEOs of various companies, it helps me understand how to, at a board level, especially as chairman, how to manage and guide and work alongside with the leaders of the organizations, and in particular with the navigators, with Doug Nunnke and with Marvin Campbell, who were both the presidents and the navigators when I was chairman. And I think that the business side of things, of doing that over the years, gave me a deeper understanding of how to best come alongside them and help them. And it also gave me an understanding of how I wanted to get the board built out, because boards are always should be thinking about, the chairman should be thinking about, okay, how do we take this board forward? What do we want it to look like 5 years from now, 10, 15 years from now, 20 years from now? And what's my role in getting that built out? And I think those are processes that most people in nonprofit world are not regularly thinking about. And so I think that's what I've brought to the table, and want to continue to do it as people desire me to be involved.
Thank you for listening to the 100X podcast. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast service. We would greatly appreciate it if you could rate the show and leave us a review. This podcast is sponsored by Anchor Investments, whose mission is to build America's most generous real estate company. To learn more, please visit anchorinv.com.